most people I think have joined us. So you're very welcome to our first inaugural webinar in our series, Resilience, Rethinking Communities in a Post-COVID World. And thank you very much for joining us. We're delighted to have you here with us. So my name is Emma, and I'll be moderating today. I'm the Programme Manager at Engineers Without Borders Ireland. So just to introduce quickly our host today, Leone McCarton. Liam is a chartered civil engineer with extensive experience managing large infrastructure projects in Ireland, Asia, South America and Africa. He's the one of the directors of Engineers Without Borders Ireland and lectures at the Technological University of Dublin. And he's also the chair of the Environmental Sciences Association of Ireland. So Liam also is leading the development technology in the community research group at the Technological University of Dublin, which focuses on innovative water management. So Liam comes from us bringing a wealth of experience, which we're really looking forward to hearing about today in his webinar. He's going to talk about the challenges facing engineers and scientists and how they radically need to change their approach to thrive in a post-COVID and post-climate change world. So Liam's going to present for about 25 minutes or so, and then we will have time for a brief Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, I'd ask you to please text them in the Q&A box that you'll see in the panel at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep a note of them, and then we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Okay, so without further ado, I'll pass over to Liam. Liam, off you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma, and welcome everyone to this first webinar presented jointly by TU Dublin and EWB Ireland. So this is the first in a series where we're hoping to explore the concept of resilience, hoping to entertain, inform, annoy, but most importantly, prompt discussion and debate. So as Emma said, for those of you who may not know me, I'm one of the directors of EWB Ireland, and I'm also a lecturer in TU Dublin. And I should say this is also part of a wider programme entitled Build Solid Ground, which is an EU programme, which EWB and TU Dublin are partners, which is exploring how we can build resilience into cities across Europe and Africa. So the context of how you join us today is really this generation of engineers and scientists is faced with unprecedented challenges, both technical, environmental, and social. The future is going to be living in a 410 world. 4 degrees warming, 10 billion people. Rapid urbanization over the next 20 years is going to mean that by 2050, 1 in 2 people are going to be living in slums or informal settlements. And of course, all of you are joining me from your home offices, your kitchen tables, your bedrooms, because we're living in a post-COVID-19 world at the moment. So this concept of understanding resilience is really what I want to explore today and talk a little bit about. And resilience, in my experience, is a little bit like sustainability. It can mean all things to all people. So let's get behind it a little bit. Let's tease out what it is and hopefully get a bit of a better understanding. So to share my understanding, resilience is going from a shock to a stress. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a picture of a town in northern Italy in 2013. This is the same town in 2018, after the earthquake, which has destroyed houses, livelihoods, and loss of life. That system has collapsed. The shock is the earthquake. Example from one of the programs in Nepal, 2015 earthquake. Again, young boy outside his house. The system has collapsed due to the earthquake, the shock to the system. School, again, 2015 earthquake in Nepal. And schools across Nepal collapsed with loss of life, with loss of infrastructure. So that's an example of a shock which is causing collapse. But yet, you travel 35 kilometers to the far side of the mountain in Nepal, and you come across this picture. The shock has become a stress. What do you mean? A stress is something that we can withstand. This is a technology that has used diverse materials. It's used local materials and skills to create a system that copes. It's resilient. Similar example, this is one of the partners that you'll see and hear from in this webinar series, Smart Shelter Foundation. This is an earthquake resilient school in Nepal. So it's had the same shock, but it's resilient. It's coped with that. It's turned the shock into a stress. So resilience for us in our work is the ability of a community to cope with these destabilizing forces. In other words, move from a shock, which causes total collapse or partial collapse of the system, to a stress in which the system can cope. So resilient cities and communities are designed and built to cope with these disturbances and destabilizations, and to absorb these events and to try to continue as near as normal as possible. And of course, what happens when you get a shock that's both local and global, both regional and worldwide, that affects technical, environmental, social, health, all aspects of our society, which is what we're living through at the moment. So 4 sections, fairly simply, it's after lunch, so we won't get too detailed, but this section is dedicated to a structural engineer, a third structural engineer colleague of mine, who claims that scientists and engineers love complexity. So this is our hard sum section. But actually it's a bit of false advertising, because I have to give you an equation because to satisfy all the engineers dialing in. But what I want to do is simplify. Let's break this resilience down into 3 components. And if we can understand these 3 components, I think at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how we can bring them back together. The first component is really core to the whole system. It's vulnerability. It's what's vulnerable, inherently vulnerable in those communities that's causing the collapse of that system. Let's explore a little bit. So vulnerability is being susceptible to being damaged or harmed. It's a weakness. It exposes the community to harm that can be inflicted on infrastructure, population, food supply, health. So vulnerable points in the community can be due to public health, such as the Covid19 crisis, climate change, location of the city, poor planning, law enforcement, or inadequate infrastructure. So exploring and understanding vulnerability is the first core part in trying to get a handle on this resilience. And again, let's just have a little look globally. Let's pick a number of key metrics just to have a look worldwide. Depending on where you're born, you have a 1 in 4 chance of reaching your 5th birthday. And depending on where that is, that chance can substantially reduce. And again, I don't want to have too much facts and figures up, but this is an interesting one that we use in our own research, because this is just taking a snapshot of 3 case studies that we're going to talk about in this webinar: Sierra Leone, Niger, and Zambia. And looking at where they are, snapshot in 2016, you start to see, actually, it's quite illuminating, because they're roughly where Ireland was in the 40s, 50s, in terms of their health system, child mortality system. Again, look at food security. Depending on where you're born, 1 in 3 of you will go to bed hungry across the world. If we look at access to clean water, a core component within combating the COVID-19 crisis, again, more than 50% of your colleagues will not have clean water depending on where you live. Sanitation, 1 in 3 people worldwide don't have a decent toilet. So you start to see a picture emerging. And let's bring it all together now, because there's a trend, and certain parts of the world have inherent vulnerabilities within their system. And the only conclusion really that you can come to, that I come to in this, is that we're living in an unequal world across all levels of infrastructure. But it's difficult to get a full handle when you look at graphs. Let's jump into 1 or 2 of these countries and let's dive in and see, okay, what does this actually mean? If you're born in Sierra Leone, for example, a country where I lived for a couple of years, beautiful country, tropical paradise, unfortunately subject to a series of shocks. The first shock was a decade-long civil war, finished in 2002, but it left a generation scarred and maimed. Sierra Leone is inherently vulnerable to a number of public health emergencies: cholera, typhoid, almost yearly. Ebola, which is the picture you're looking at here, was 2015. So a country like that has inherent vulnerabilities almost on a yearly basis. And again, getting behind a statistic, if you look at this picture and you see a statistic like 1 in 4 people will die, children will die before their 4th birthday. You're probably wondering what you're looking at there. What you're looking at there is a maternity hospital for 40,000 people in an area called Crew Bay, which is an area of Freetown in Sierra Leone. 1 in 8 women will die in childbirth in a country like this. And if we look at water sanitation, again, just jumping in, this is the morning ritual. Women and children predominantly are the water carriers in a country like Sierra Leone, but you go to the water point. So self-isolating in a country like that is almost impossible. There's a legacy of failure in infrastructure, which we'll talk a little about later. And so the morning sessions for some people is going to a highly polluted river or stream, and the consequences on health and inherent. And then, like I said, there's a legacy of failure of high cost infrastructure programs. Apologies to perhaps all the structural engineers tuning in. This is an interesting structure that isn't really operating as it was intended to. Because of a failure. There's an inherent vulnerability in the system that wasn't really understood. We're going to jump around a little bit now. I'm going to move to Niger, another country that features in some of the poorest countries in the world. Incredible country, vibrant people, vibrant nomadic people, but inherent vulnerabilities within a country like that too. They live with extremes. They live with climate change. It's not a concept. Climate change is a reality in a country like that. But so they've come up with their own coping system. This is what you're looking at here is a community seed bank. So each year, the communities in a particular village donate a number of seeds. So this acts as a buffer. So if they get a period of time without rains or where the seed fails, they've got 1 or 2 years buffer capacity. Unfortunately, with climate change, year upon year, the crops fail. So that the shock in this case is a nutrition crisis. So back in 2006, 2007, this is the pictures that started to emerge across Niger at public health facilities. So how do you cope? How do you turn a shock into a stress? Well, oftentimes in a country like that, you need external assistance. In this case, we built what's called a mobile treatment system, a nutrition center, in about 5 days. And some of the innovations where this is something called plumpy nut, which is a very nutritious food that is fed to severely malnutrition kids over maybe 4 or 5 days. And it turns that shock into a stress where they can cope. So we start to understand resilience, looking at vulnerabilities. This is the next section that I call the Roy Keane section. Why do I call it the Roy Keane section? Well, we need to shake things up a little bit. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So we need to think differently. We need to adapt. And back to our complex equation again. If we have an inherent understanding of vulnerabilities, then there's 2 other components that we need to think about. The second component there is diversity. What do I mean by that? Diversity basically means various or different ways of doing things. So how to increase diversity. For example, a good example is the response to COVID in Ireland, where the public health system was forecast not to be able to cope. So very quickly they built diversity into the response, where they adopted private health facilities and so on. So diversity is an important way to combat shocks to a system. And within TU Dublin, myself and a colleague, Sean O'Hogan, we work a lot with natural systems. And the question is, how do natural systems cope with this vulnerability? Well, they do something that I'm accused of not being able to do by my wife. They multitask. They give you several different things. They're dynamic, they change. They have a biodiversity built into the system. They're adaptable. They can adapt to droughts, floods. They're sustainable. They use local renewable resources. They also give you added value of recreational water, wastewater, flood storage. So within this concept of resilient infrastructure, diversity and nature-based systems are an important part of the tool, I think, going forward. And this is an example of how we explain it sometimes in workshops. What do engineers do? We build in nature. We put a solution, concrete, steel, and we put it in the natural environment with little or no interaction with that natural environment. We try to minimize the impact. What does building nature in? Building nature means looking to nature right from the start, looking at how nature can provide the technological solution within our system right from the start. So we build resilience into the solution. Now, for those of you thinking after lunch, having a coffee, this is all green bling, let me give you an example from one of our partners in Water Europe, a European organization. of this building nature. And this is from the north of the Netherlands. It's called Lake Issel. Lake Issel is a very important lake for water supply, for recreation, but it's had a huge challenge over the years with eutrophication, with nitrates, with phosphates, and it being the Netherlands, all of the surrounding area is 1.5 meters below the lake. So they're very worried about climate change. So Deltares, when they were developing a solution, started to look differently. And they put forward what they proposed as an inland shore, where they start to look at a natural area of land that can multitask. And what they identified was an area close to the lake here. Together with the community, they decided this would be a water treatment system, a wastewater treatment system, a flood system. So they built nature into the solution right from the start. And the final product is this area that you see here. This is an example of when the engineer leaves the room and the architect comes, because this is an aerial view. But what you've got here is a very complex water treatment system, a wastewater treatment system, water filter, but you've also got a park. You've also got a biodiversity area. You've also got an area for walking and for cycling. So it's multitasking and it's building resilience into the solution. So the last part of our complex equation then is this term S, the most overused word in the English language, my humble opinion, sustainability. But understanding sustainability is crucial to understanding resilience. So our understanding of sustainability is the well-being of the natural world and the responsible use of resources. So we can reduce vulnerability in communities or cities by sustainably promoting local solutions for local problems. For example, let's take off again. None of us can fly anywhere these days, so this is the only chance you have to travel. Let's go to Inner Hebrides, up in Isle of Eigg, to be precise, in Scotland. A community we did some work with a number of years ago. And Eigg had a challenge. They weren't connected to the mainland for electrical supply. So they were reliant on a diesel generator. So they got together over a period of time and decided they needed a community-driven solution with very limited external resources. It's to be community managed, community constructed, and community operated. And what they developed was one of the first integrated energy systems in Scotland, where they looked at what are our local resources, the combination of hydro, solar, and then on the southwest of the island, wind. And they developed a local integrated energy grid that could provide a solution for the community. Solar system is about 30 kilowatt, which they are currently operating. They got some wind turbines from Germany that were decommissioned after about 15 years use, and they got them shipped over to Eigg and recommissioned them. So they provide about a third of the power. And then they have a local hydro system. So again, it's an example of thinking about resilience right from the start in your solution, building diversity into the system and building local resources for local problems. Now, they have a large bank of storage capability. Unfortunately, it doesn't provide 100% of the power. They're still reliant on about 10% diesel as a backup, particularly during winter times. But they've also adapted a local solution to a local problem. What you're looking at here is, well, first of all, you're looking at the local bar, and they have a control system, green light, red light. So how they control power on the island is when it's in the middle of winter and someone sees green light, then it means don't put on the washing machine, don't put on the dishwasher, reduce your consumption, conserve. If you see, as opposed to red light, if you see green light, then it means happy days, we have sufficient power to resource. So it's a community managed system with very little external inputs required. So to bring that kind of together, what for us, our experience is to really create resilient communities. First of all, we need to understand and reduce the vulnerabilities in the system. We need to think differently. We need to act differently. We need to interact differently. We need to create diverse solutions, not single solutions, but solutions that give us multifunctions. And local problems need local solutions. So we need to increase sustainable use of local resources. So the last section after lunch is what I call the big ideas section. Again, a little bit of false advertising. There's probably no big ideas there, but it's really kind of at this first webinar to prompt a bit of thought process. And we hear this so often now, living with the new normal. I have no idea what the new normal is, but it probably is something to do with coping with extremes, more and more. And we don't have to go far to look at extremes. Again, this is taken from a cartoon that appeared in The Guardian, but I think it's one of the best pictures I've seen that explains the impact global, local, regional emergency has. COVID-19 has forced us to act, think, and interact differently. So maybe it's given us a blueprint as to how we could actually solve and contribute to climate change by radically changing our structure, our ideas, how we function. But as I said earlier in the webinar, we live in an unequal world. So COVID-19 has not been equally felt across the world. If you're living in certain countries in Africa, this is an example from South Africa, where it's exacerbated food insecurities. So this is a 4-kilometer queue to collect food, and that's replicated along different countries. But the challenges are global. The solutions are local. We need to link the two. We need to think globally, act locally. But we have a problem. The Sustainable Development Goals, which are supposed to be the blueprint for sustainable development for the next 10 years, primarily driven by growth to sustain our existing lifestyles. But we also want to end poverty. We also want to tackle climate change. So are those three mutually exclusive or compatible? I'm not so sure they are compatible. And this is one of the decisions that we need to really address within this generation. And I would leave you with this thought. I think my own feelings is that the decision is now, particularly for this younger generation, those of you who are maybe starting out on your working life. I think we need to make a decision this year on what we do. And I would say we have three concepts. We can pull the ladder up, which is the Donald Trump philosophy, which is retrench from global institutions, maintain your lifestyle, and the poor get poorer, the rich hopefully maintain or increase their wealth. That's what I call pull the ladder up. Business as usual, drive ahead. It's pretty much what we've been trying to do for the last 10, 15 years with climate change. Continue on with our infrastructure, with our political decision and see what happens. Or on the right-hand side, we have converge. Converge means we in high-income countries have to really reduce how we use resources. COVID-19 response is an example. And by doing that, we allow low-income countries to increase their use of resources. And ideally, we start to converge on some kind of sustainable path. And there's a lot of information coming at you there. So let me leave you on a positive note, and that we talk about resilience and we talk about building resilience into communities. This is an example in February where I came back from a trip to one of the partners, and we are starting two partners actually in Zambia, Habitat for Humanity and Zambia, Ireland. And this is an example, just a quick example of how we're trying to work with these partners to build resilience within a community in Zambia. And always dangerous to play with technology in a webinar. for listening. And if there's any questions, comments, happy to answer. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Liam. So we have one here from Chris McCallum, who asked, is it possible, do you think it's possible to move from a 75 to 25 world to a sustainable and equal world if most of the resources are in the poorer global south?
Thanks, Chris. Nice, easy question there for Wednesday afternoon. No. You want a longer answer? I think it comes back to, well, yes and no. We've shown with COVID what a concerted response can do, where you've got community engagement, where you've got government engagement, business engagement with an end product. So now, COVID maybe can't be sustained long term, but why not? Like we had the climate change, climate action program over the last year or two, where hundreds of thousands of mainly young people came out demanding change, but that wasn't reciprocated with business, with governments. So I think, Chris, the answer is, it is possible, but it requires a radical change, almost on a COVID-style response to actually achieve it. Whether we're willing to do that in high-income countries, I'm not so sure. Another question from John, Emma, is there?
Yeah, we have a couple of ones coming through now. We have another one from Ashish, which we'll come to now in a sec, Ashish. But from John asking, how would you weight the variables in your R equals V plus D plus S equation? Some seem more significant than others, which of course would change over time and nature of the shock.
John, yeah. I have a second webinar, which is the hard sums webinar, right? Because you're right, there is a weighting system, but for the purposes of today, what I really wanted to do was talk about the concepts, talk about the three components, and what the answer to your question, John, is we've been working on the EU project, which you see behind me, Build Solid Ground, to develop a toolkit that we've been trialing with a number of EU partners, and that's one of the aspects of it. So again, feel free to send me an email, and I can chat to you and maybe even share the toolkit with you or do a workshop together.
Okay, so maybe just read out Ashish's question there. Ashish's question is, in what possible ways can I contribute to my society with a background of structural engineering to achieve the SDG 11? It says, after the Gorka earthquake in 2015 and now COVID-19, I feel very concerned that structural engineering can help to achieve the SDG 11 in a more sustainable way.
Well, I don't know your background or your work, but one way within EWB Ireland at the moment, we're working with a number of, to basically harness the background and capability of structural engineers and match them with projects within developing countries, with NGOs where they need that kind of background. So this can be desk-based primarily. So the answer to your question is, one practical way you can do it is get in touch with EWB Ireland, have a discussion in your firm or your workplace, and start to engage. We'll have a website that's going live hopefully over the summer, where we'll have a database of projects and practical ways that you can actually start to engage, as I said, from your desk. Any other things floating, Emma?
Nothing else that I see at the moment.
So will we wrap it up there? And thanks to everyone, and thank you, Emma, for organising it.
Thank you for.
And like I said, if it is downloadable, I think we'll share, Emma, the links with everyone.
Yeah, really do.
Please do follow up. Either contact Emma, myself, Declan, any of the team at EWB to continue this discussion.
We just have maybe one final question here before I maybe go, Liam, which I'm not sure if we answer, but from Mihaela. Is there any project that is focused on the situations of European forests?
There is one of, actually one of the partners, and hopefully he'll be giving a webinar in this series, Victor Boomer, who formerly worked with Deltares, the case study that I showed there. He's involved with Earthwatch, and they're working on creating and looking at mini forests and forests across the UK and Europe. So again, if you want to email me, feel free, and I can put you in direct contact. But hopefully Victor will be doing a webinar explaining the work that they're doing, probably coming up in a couple of weeks. Keep an eye on the webinar series.
Great. I'm just typing, guys, Liam's email in here, just in case you haven't seen it in our promotion beforehand. So I've just shared it there in the chat. So if you'd like to make a note of it to reach out to Liam. But yeah, if there's no other questions, then yeah, we might wrap up there. So a huge thank you to you all for joining for our first webinar, and thanks to Liam for the great presentation. And we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully next Wednesday, or throughout the summer. We'll be running this series until the end of August. So you can keep an eye for the details of our webinars for onwards, because we'll be updating that in the next couple of weeks. But the link that you received to register for this, you can also register for any of the webinars there. So we look forward to welcoming you again.